When you think computer, you probably picture something sleek, modern, right? Born in a sterile lab somewhere. But what if I told you the core idea behind your phone is way older, and honestly, a lot weirder than you think? Let's dig into where the digital age really got its start.
So yeah, when you ask where do computers really come from, it's easy to think of, Silicon Valley, clean rooms, all that stuff. But the real story, man, it starts way, way earlier.
That's right, I'm talking about the 1800s. The basic concepts, the very DNA of every single device you own, they come from noisy, clattering textile mills and dusty old accounting offices. Seriously. So let's pull on that first thread and see where it leads.
All right, so our first stop. This one might blow your mind a little. The very first programmers, they weren't engineers, they weren't mathematicians. Nope, they were weavers. So, picture this. It's the early 1800s, and the textile industry has this massive problem. They want to make these incredibly intricate, beautiful patterns in their fabrics. And the question was, how could they do it automatically and get it perfect every single time? Well, the big breakthrough comes in 1801 from a French silk weaver, a guy named Joseph-Marie Jacquard. He comes up with this incredible loom that's controlled by a chain of wooden cards with holes punched in them. And the genius of it was how simple it was. The loom would read the card, and if there was a hole, that was one command. No hole? That was a different command. It was a simple yes or no, a binary instruction basically, telling the machine exactly which threads to raise or lower.
And that chain of cards, that was it. That was, for all intents and purposes, the world's very first computer program. I mean, think about it. It was a set of instructions that was readable, you could store it, and you could repeat it perfectly. That one idea, that you can store instructions for a machine to follow later, that changed everything.
Okay, so fast forward a few decades. This revolutionary idea of a programmable machine, it's about to get a massive upgrade, thanks to a seriously forward-thinking mathematician. Now, the next big problem they were trying to solve wasn't about weaving patterns. It was about crunching numbers. Sure, they had calculators back then, but they were all single-purpose machines. One calculator could add, another could subtract. The big dream, the holy grail, was to build one single universal machine that you could program to solve any math problem you gave it. And the guy with that dream was Charles Babbage. In 1837, he designed something he called the analytical engine. And it was, essentially, a blueprint for the world's first general-purpose mechanical computer. And get this, how did he plan on programming it? You guessed it, the Jacquard loom. He was going to use punched cards to feed instructions into his machine.
And this is where his design is it's pure genius. It had four main parts. First, a reader to take in the instructions from those punched cards. Second, a store to hold the numbers, kind of like memory. Third, a mill. That's where the actual calculations happened. And finally, a printer to spit out the results.
Okay, now look at this because it shows just how mind-blowingly ahead of his time he was. His mill, that's the CPU in your computer. The store, that's your RAM, your memory. The reader, that's your input, your keyboard, your mouse. And the printer, that's your output, your screen. The entire logical blueprint for a modern computer was designed in the Victorian era with gears and steam power. Just wow.
All right, so we've got the pieces, right? We've got programmability, thanks to the weavers. We've got the universal architecture, thanks to Babbage. But these were still just ideas, just blueprints. So what was the spark that finally pushed all this into the real world? Well, it was a massive, real-world crisis, a data problem.
Jump to 1890. The United States has a huge issue. The population is exploding, and they have to count everyone for this census. But here's the crisis. They figured out that counting it all by hand would actually take longer than the 10 years they had until the next census. It was a complete disaster waiting to happen. You could say it was the world's first big data problem.
Now, this whole crisis didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The 19th century was already seeing a boom in machines for business. Back in 1820, you had the arithmetic-motor, the first calculator that actually sold well. Then, by 1888, you've got the Burroughs machine, this mass-produced adding machine for accountants. So, the stage was totally set for a major breakthrough.
And the solution came from an inventor named Herman Hollerith. He built this machine called the tabulator. And it wasn't just mechanical, it was electromechanical. And what did it use to store and process all that census data? Punched cards, of course, a direct descendant of the idea from the weaving looms.
It was a massive success, and it proved once and for all that automated computing could solve gigantic real-world problems.
So let's take a step back and, well, let's weave all these different threads together and see what kind of picture it makes.
The digital world that we live in today, it wasn't born in some single eureka moment. It was really pieced together from three totally separate ideas, from completely different worlds. You have programmability, that came from a weaver. The universal architecture, that came from a mathematician. And the need for large-scale data processing, that came from a statistician trying to solve a government crisis.
And all this history leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on, right? I mean, if the foundational ideas of the computer came from textile weaving and accounting, it really makes you wonder, what totally unrelated industry out there, right now, is quietly cooking up the core logic that's going to power the next big technological revolution?